He looked like any other quiet rancher. Weathered hands, dusty boots, a man who spoke only when words had purpose. But when Silas Ward saw his maid limping across the kitchen that morning, what he uncovered would rattle the sheriff's office clear to its walls. The ranch house rested in the valley like it had grown from the soil itself. Aged wood, honest sweat. Silas had built it with his own hands 15 years ago, each beam set with quiet pride. He'd given his life to it, believing in simple truths, hard work, fair pay, and keeping one's word. He was the kind of man who paid on time and never pried into a person's past. Mercy Whitmore had come 3 months earlier, hat in hand, desperation in her eyes. Barely 20, with a weary look that belonged to someone twice her age. She needed work. He needed help. That was enough. She kept to herself, did her chores well, and Silas admired that. Folks who spoke little often carried the kind of stories worth hearing when they finally spoke. But this morning felt different. He'd just come in from checking the cattle, boots thudding against the porch when he saw her through the window. Mercy moved like every step hurt. Her right leg dragged slightly, her hand clutching at chairs or tabletops for balance, her jaw tight against pain. Silas stood there, watching. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed her favor one side, but today it was worse, much worse. The way she bent to pick up a spoon reminded him of his old mare after a bad fall. Hurt, but too proud to show it. He pushed open the door, hinges groaning their usual song. Mercy straightened fast, trying to hide it, but he'd already seen enough. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, something flickered in her eyes that made his chest go heavy. Fear. Not of him, but fear. All the same, she turned back to the stove, stirring the coffee too carefully. "Morning, Mr. Ward, coffee's almost ready." Her voice carried that same fragile steadiness he'd heard in Wounded Animals, the sound of something, pretending it was fine when it clearly wasn't. Silas hung his hat on the peg by the door and studied her back. The way her shoulders tensed, the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for the coffee cups. Every movement told a story she wasn't ready to tell. But Silas Ward had spent too many years reading signs, shifting weather, restless cattle, and the quiet language of pain. Whatever was happening to Mercy Whitmore, it was getting worse. The question was whether she'd been hurt by chance or by someone's hand. And if it was the latter, Silas would soon have to decide what kind of man he really was. He accepted the cup from Mercy's trembling hands, his fingers brushing hers for a heartbeat. Her skin was cold despite the warmth of the room, and she flinched, not startled but bracing like she expected hurt. He took a slow sip, eyes never leaving her. She kept her back turned, scrubbing already clean counters, rearranging things that didn't need touching, movements born from wanting to vanish without walking away. "Mercy," he said softly. She froze, cloth motionless in her hands. "Yes, sir? You're hurt." It wasn't a question, and both of them knew it. Silence stretched thin between them. Outside, a meadowlark called somewhere beyond the fence, its song bright and careless against the morning stillness. Inside, the only sound was the clock's steady tick and Mercy's uneven breath. When she finally turned, Silas's jaw hardened. Her lower lip was split, still raw. A yellow bruise shadowed her cheek, mostly hidden behind loose strands of hair. But it was her eyes that said the most, the dull surrender of someone who'd stopped expecting mercy. "I fell," she said quickly. "Clumsy of me. Missed a step coming down the stairs last night." Silas set his cup down carefully. He'd heard too many lies to miss their hollow echo. "Show me these stairs," he said. Mercy's face went pale. "Sir, the stairs you fell down. I'd like to see them." Her mouth opened, then shut again. They both knew her cabin, just behind the main house, didn't have stairs. Only one step up to the porch. Silas had built it himself. He knew every nail in the place. The lie hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Mercy's hands twisted in her apron. For a moment he thought she might confess. Instead, she lifted her chin, defiant, trembling, proud. "I should get back to work," she said. Silas watched her move. Slow, deliberate, every step measured to keep pain at bay. Whatever had happened, it wasn't the first time. The way she hid her injuries spoke of practice. Not accident. This was survival. Quiet, controlled, learned. But as she limped toward the pantry, Silas Ward made a decision that shifted something deep in him. He would find out who had done this to her. And when he did, that man would learn what it meant to cross someone who believed protecting what was his wasn't a choice, it was a vow. The only question now was whether the truth would be worse than he was ready to face. That afternoon, Silas did something he'd never done before, watched his own land like a stranger might be hiding on it. He worked near the barn, pretending to mend a harness while his eyes stayed fixed on the path leading from town to Mercy's cabin. The sun had begun its slow drop behind the ridge when a lone rider appeared. Even from a distance, Silas recognized the lazy posture and swaggering gait of Deputy Vernon Briggs. The man rode like he owned every stretch of dirt his horse crossed, his badge flashing in the fading light. Silas had never trusted Briggs. The deputy had a cruel streak, deep as a well gone dry and a way of staring at people, like they owed him their breath. He wasn't a man of justice, just one who liked the taste of power. Everyone in town knew it, but knowing and doing, something about it weren't the same thing. Briggs dismounted near Mercy's cabin, tying his horse to the post Silas had built for guests. Only this didn't look like any kind of official visit. The deputy looked around, nervous eyes sweeping the yard before he rapped on Mercy's door with the back of his hand, hard enough that Silas heard it clear from the barn. The door opened almost at once, like she'd been waiting. From his spot in the shadows, Silas couldn't catch their words, but body language told him more than voices ever could. Briggs shoved his way inside without invitation. Mercy stepped back, her stance small, frightened. The door shut behind them, and Silas's hands curled into fists. Every instinct told him to storm over and deal with it the way his father would have, straight and hard. But reason held him still. If he acted too soon, Mercy might pay the price. He needed to know what kind of evil he was facing before he struck. 20 long minutes dragged by. Silas paced the dirt bare, jaw locked tight enough to ache. When the door finally creaked open, Briggs came out first, adjusting his belt with the smug ease of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Mercy appeared behind him, standing crooked, her body tight with fresh pain. Briggs mounted up whistling as he rode off toward town, the tune cutting through the twilight like mockery. Mercy lingered in the doorway, one hand on the frame just to keep steady, then slipped back inside and shut the door. Silas stood there in the falling dark, his thoughts clicking together like iron traps. A deputy with too much power. A young woman with no one to defend her. And now, the truth of those bruises. The only question left was what he meant to do about it. Morning came gray and heavy, clouds drooping low over the valley. Silas hadn't slept. He'd stared at the ceiling all night, turning plans over in his head until dawn drew its first pale line across the window. By then, he'd made up his mind. Mercy was in the kitchen again, moving slower than before. She didn't meet his eyes as she set out breakfast. Her hair fell forward, hiding new marks on her neck. The sight made something cold and immovable settle deep in his chest. "Mercy," he said quietly, voice steady as a drawn gun. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." The coffee pot froze midair. "Sir?" "Deputy Briggs. He's been coming here, hasn't he?" The pot trembled in her grip. She barely managed to set it down. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. "I saw him yesterday," Silas said. "I saw how you looked when he left." Inside him, anger simmered, cold and dangerous. How long has this been going on? Her composure cracked. Her shoulders shook, eyes shining with tears she couldn't hold back. "You don't understand," she said, voice breaking. "He's a deputy. Who's going to believe me? Who's going to care what happens to someone like me?" Then the truth poured out, words tumbling fast, like water from a burst dam. She told him about arriving 3 months ago, running from her past out east, about how Briggs had cornered her behind the general store, his charm turning to threats when she refused him, how he'd claimed her as his, said if she spoke, she'd vanish into the mountains. "He said he's done it before," she whispered. Something in Silas went still. He'd always known Briggs was cruel, but this was evil with a face. "Why didn't you run?" he asked. Mercy gave a hollow laugh. "With what money? Where would I go? He made sure everyone knew I was under his protection. No one would hire me. You were the only one who gave me a chance. Silas rose slowly, both hands pressing flat on the table. When he spoke, his voice was iron. He's not going to hurt you again. Mr. Ward, please, she said, panic flaring. He'll kill you or get the sheriff to. They protect each other. But Silas was already moving toward the door, his path clear for the first time in days. He paused, hand on the frame, and looked back at her. There's something you ought to know about me, Mercy, he said. I've never been much for talking, but I've always been real good at making sure the right thing gets done. Then he stepped out into the gray morning. Mercy stood frozen, fear and fragile hope warring in her eyes as he disappeared down the path toward towns. The walk to Cedar Falls would take an hour, plenty of time for a man like Silas Ward to decide exactly how he meant to end this. The town lay in a dusty hollow between two low ridges, its main street lined with tired buildings. Silas walked down the center of that street, steady and sure. People noticed because when Silas Ward came to town, it always meant trouble for someone. He found Deputy Briggs where he expected, outside the saloon, leaning on a post, badge glinting in the dull sun. He was talking loud, boasting about the man he'd run off the week before like cruelty was a sport. Silas stopped 10 feet away and waited. She had bruises that told a story no decent man should ever have to. Here Marshal Kane studied Silas for a long moment. Everyone in the territory knew the rancher's name, an honest man who kept to himself and never spoke unless it mattered. If Silas Ward was standing in the middle of town making accusations, it meant something was dead serious. These are serious charges, Kane said at last. They're lies. Briggs barked, his voice high with panic. You can't take their word over a sworn officer. That's when Silas pulled out what he'd kept hidden. The proof. A torn piece of fabric he'd found near Mercy's cabin. It matched the shirt Briggs was wearing, down to the frayed edge. He held it up for all to see. Kane's eyes flicked from the cloth to Briggs's shirt, then back to Silas. When he finally spoke, his tone carried the weight of justice long overdue. Vernon Briggs, he said, you're under arrest. The jail door slammed shut behind Briggs with a metallic finality that echoed through Cedar Falls. Marshal Kane turned the key, hanging it on the hook behind his desk for the whole town to witness. The disgraced deputy sat on the bunk, head in his hands, his reign of fear finally broken. Outside, Kane faced Silas. Bring Miss Whitmore tomorrow, he said. She'll need to make her statement. Silas nodded. She'll be here. Kane's weathered features softened. Thank you, Ward, I should have seen it. Should have stopped him sooner. Silas gave a small nod. We all should have. But it's done now. The ride home gave him time to think. Mercy would need to heal, body and spirit. But for the first time in a long while, she'd be able to rest without fear. He found her sitting on her porch, staring out toward the mountains as if they were new to her eyes. When she heard his horse, she stood slowly, questions trembling on her lips. It's done, Silas said simply, dismounting. Briggs is in jail. He won't trouble you or anyone again. Mercy's knees gave way and she dropped to the steps, sobs breaking loose, not the quiet, pained kind, but the kind that washed away months of terror. I can't believe it, she whispered. I thought he'd always. You thought wrong, Silas said gently. Sometimes it just takes one person to say enough. They sat together as the sun melted behind the mountains, painting the sky gold and crimson. The ranch felt different now, still peaceful, free. What happens now? She asked softly. Now you heal, he said. Now you remember what it's like to be safe. And if you want to stay here, there's honest work for you. If folks ask questions, let them. Truth moves faster than lies once it starts. As night settled and stars flickered above, Mercy Whitmore smiled for the first time in months. A small, fragile smile, but real. And for Silas Ward, a man of few words that was worth every risk he'd taken. Sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with guns or fists, but with courage, the kind it takes to stand when standing matters most. And when a quiet rancher finally spoke, his voice was enough to shake the very foundations of justice itself. The truth had set them both free.